So glad I have the opportunity to talk with all of you. It's a late night conversation, but here I am in front of the bookshelf. Imagine that, in front of the bookshelf. It is wild, isn't it wild? Wild. It's late night here in New York City. It is just turned 12:30 a.m. 12:30 a.m., but that's okay. I'm here to chat with you all. Probably won't be the longest chat I've ever had, but that's okay. We'll just do our thing. I'll give you a few updates on world events as my opening spiel. And then from there, I'll do my roll call and call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I'll just answer your super chat questions and we'll call it a night. I figured I would get on here and do a late night conversation. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. It's a lovely, it is technically Thursday morning here in New York. It seems like Wednesday night, but the day changes at midnight, just like it does every night. So be sure to hit the like button, folks. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. I'm glad that the weather is starting to get a little bit better today in New York City. It was a little bit better. Yeah, let's jump into a few things. One thing that is getting all the buzz right now in left-wing media is the New York City Police Department 1965 letter. 1965, the New York City Police Department, there was an undercover officer who has a letter that civil rights leaders are saying basically amounts to a confession that the NYPD and the FBI murdered Malcolm X. Now, this is a big letter, but it leads to what I think is a very important conversation that needs to be had, which is COINTELPRO happened. COINTELPRO happened. The FBI in the 1950s, later in the 60s, and then most especially escalating in the early 1970s, launched a program to crush left-wing activism. The primary target at the beginning was the Communist Party USA. Later it expanded to include civil rights organizations, and then it included the peace movement. Eventually, all kinds of organizations were targeted by the FBI's COINTELPRO program. Many have described it as a war on dissent. And the way that it became public, fascinating story, is in a town called Media, Pennsylvania. There was a group of activists who broke into the FBI headquarters and stole the documents and then handed them over to the press. Now, eventually, in the late 70s, there was something called the Church Committee, the Congressional Church Committee, that investigated the FBI and revealed their notorious activities. They also investigated the CIA. And it was all over the news. The fact that the CIA had framed up left-wing activists, tried to send them to prison, the fact that the FBI had planted false news stories to attempt to discredit Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had tried to accuse Martin Luther King Jr. of being gay, of being a Soviet agent. The fact that the FBI had even sent a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. urging him to commit suicide. The fact that the FBI engaged in all kinds of nefarious activities to try and suppress the freedom of speech of left-wing activists was not a secret. It was common knowledge. In fact, a Trotskyite group called the Socialist Workers' Party. The Socialist Workers' Party, all right, ML is becoming Maoist. The Socialist Workers' Party actually sued the FBI in court and won a settlement from the FBI. This was public knowledge. It was considered a matter of public record that the FBI had done these things. Nobody denied it. But then, the U.S. stabilized in the 1980s. And then you had the 1990s, fall of the Soviet Union. And when I first discovered COINTELPRO and read about it in books, I told my family members about it. I told my classmates about it. And this was in the, 2000s, 2004, 2005, 2006. And when that happened, I haven't listened to it, Jared. When that happened, I remember when I told my classmates about COINTELPRO, people rolled their eyes. And they said, oh, that's crazy. That's made up. That's a crazy conspiracy theory. That didn't happen. Now, I kid you not, even though it was public record, it was all over the news, it vanished from public memory, and it was not discussed. And really, the only people who knew about COINTELPRO, it seemed, at the time that I was getting political, around the time the Iraq invasion happened, the only people who knew about it were left-wing activists and probably FBI agents or people who'd studied the history of law enforcement. But average Americans, if you told them the FBI had a program to suppress the Black Liberation Movement, to suppress left-wing activism, they would roll their eyes at you. I will never forget being in a college class and raising my hand and saying that the police had been involved in the assassination of Fred Hampton. Someone sitting behind me snorted, "That's fact." And I told him to Google Fred Hampton. I have no idea what that means, Mateo. No idea what that means. Anyhow, Google Fred Hampton, they told me. And, I told them to Google Fred Hampton. But people just considered COINTELPRO to be this crazy conspiracy theory, completely made up. But, as the internet became more prevalent, as information was more broadly circulated, it started to enter public discourse. Eventually, they made a movie, and they made this movie with Leonardo DiCaprio about the life of I'm sorry, a little distracted there, about the life of J. Edgar Hoover. And thank you, Mateo. J. Edgar Hoover was the director of the FBI, and they made this movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and made it look like COINTELPRO was just the results of one man's activities. And it was pretty wild. But, now, because of Black Lives Matter, because of a lot of publicity around the Black Panthers and stuff, people acknowledge COINTELPRO. But, it was acknowledged very widely in the 70s. But now, at this point, it's acknowledged once again. But at one point, it was just kind of dropped out of public discourse, and that's very scary. And this could happen again if the internet censorship keeps up. All right, the Green Book. Take from it. Right? I mean, it's a little bit scary, right? Now there is this feeling that anything that is pre-Marxian progressive figures, all right, that anything that is against the standard narrative in the United States, if you say it, people are basically programmed to say, oh, that's a crazy conspiracy theory. And a lot of these fake leftists are so convinced that if you say anything that goes against the mainstream media, you're a right-wing Trumper conspiracy theorist, that they, if it weren't for the fact that COINTELPRO were all over Netflix and all of that, they would probably try to deny it, right? It's kind of scary. And it's something people should be concerned about, I think. Okay, so now COINTELPRO is being widely discussed. That's great. That's great. But if people like me and people, that I'm in solidarity with, hadn't been raising the alarm and letting people roll their eyes at them, it would not have been, there you go. It would not have been widely circulated. So I'm writing your super chat down. So there you go. Alrighty, folks. So I just wanted to comment on that. So now there's widespread discussion about this NYPD letter. I did want to say it didn't get much attention in U.S. media. But Joe Biden, when he spoke to the NATO countries, to the European Union, he did indicate that there may be hope for the U.S.-China relationship. At this point, the United States and China are the two largest economies in the world. There seemed to be hope. There seemed to be hope in his remarks that maybe some of the heated escalation of the trade war that we heard under Trump could be rolled back, and that was certainly exciting. So we hope that that is the case. I'd like to see the USA and China get along better. I certainly would like to see that. And we heard some of that in Joe Biden's words. So maybe there is hope there. Now, Joe Biden obviously is trying to play it up like he's just as anti-China as Trump is. But there was some indication that that may not be the case. There have been some recent documents that were published. As Trump was leaving office, there were some documents that were revealed. And those documents seemed to indicate that there are long-term discussions going on in the Pentagon about the danger of war, about the need to improve relations. All right. Venezuela. Contraception. All right. I wanted to also mention that the Iran nuclear deal. Now, there's talk about the Iran nuclear deal being reestablished, but Iran is saying, look, if you want to reestablish the nuclear deal, the USA needs to lift the sanctions that were imposed on Iran. Needs to lift the sanctions that were imposed on Iran. So Iran is not exactly willing to come back to the table so easily. Let's remember that the Iran nuclear deal, they assassinated Qasem Soleimani. The Trump administration pulled out of the deal. There was an Iranian nuclear scientist who was killed. So getting Iran simply to come back to the table is not going to be so easy. It's also worth noting that the European Union's ambassador to Venezuela has been pulled out in response to the European Union imposing special sanctions on leaders of Venezuela. Now, the European Union does recognize Maduro as the leader of Venezuela, but it seems like that relationship is not completely solid. So there's all this controversy right now. I don't know if people have heard this about Trump speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference. The question is, will Donald Trump be allowed to speak at CPAC, at the big Republican gathering? And the rank and file of the Republican Party says yes, right? Most Republicans at this point are Trump sympathizers. However, the leaders of the Republican Party, most explicitly Lynn Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, are trying to say that Trump should not be welcome. And this is kind of a parallel to what's been going on in the Democratic Party, right? The rank and file of the Republican Party are Trumpers. The rank and file of the Democratic Party are Bernie Sanders kind of people. But it seems like from the top, writing it down, from the top of the party, there is tension with the base, right? Americans are moving in a populist direction. Americans are angry at the government. They're angry at the rich and powerful. They're moving in a populist direction. But it seems like the leadership of both parties is very entrenched and wants to kind of stop that from happening. So, that's worth acknowledging. I did also want to mention, people may not be aware of this, but Mike Pence will be speaking at the annual rally. It'll be held kind of remotely and online, but it is the annual gathering of the Moonies, of the Unification Church in Korea. Mike Pence, the former vice president, is going to be a keynote speaker at an event held by one of the most crazy extreme cults, a group that believes that a Korean guy was the reincarnation of Jesus. I actually did an interview with a former member of it. I called it Life Inside of a CIA Countergang. But this very extreme religious fanatical group that that has its members, spouses chosen for them by this, this Korean guy who claimed he was the second coming of Jesus. Mike Pence is going to be speaking at their event, even though this is a very extreme organization that is linked to some anti-Semitism and some Korean supremacism and it's a pretty bizarre group. You look into the history of the Unification Church, but Mike Pence will be keynoting their address. Thoughts about, okay, all right. So I wanted to mention that. In other news, I did want to just quickly mention that this weekend we will be having our 5th web conference for the Center for Political Innovation. The CPI web conference will be happening on February 27th, Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that web conference will be great. It's going to be called Building Communities of Solidarity. It will feature cultural performances by Max the Sax, as well as the well-known Latin American poet Matt Cedillo. Furthermore, there will be an update from activists in Texas who are part of San Angelo Solidarity, and they'll be reporting about the mutual aid and community work they've been doing to trying to aid the people of Texas as they face, a clampdown of capitalism and, capitalists' meltdown as the power grid explodes and the water supply is falling apart. That's going to be great. There's going to be a presentation from a longtime friend of mine about talking to Trump supporters and engaging with Trump supporters about socialism, and that's going to be great. So I'm looking forward to that for sure. There's going to be a presentation that will be given about Ukraine and about the eastern regions of Ukraine and their struggle for independence, etc. And the keynote address is going to be given by Dust James. Dust James is a great, he's on YouTube. Folks have probably seen his channel, right? I interviewed him a long time ago as the Marxist-Leninist trucker. Dust James, he's a great YouTube broadcaster. And he's going to be giving the keynote speech. So it's going to be a great event this Saturday. So be sure to tune in. It'll be here on this channel, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be emceeing, but it'll be other folks giving the cultural performances and talks. So be sure to tune into that. Also wanted to mention that on Sunday evening, this Sunday, the 28th of February, that will be the next patrons-only stream that I do. For those who are supporters of what we do here on Patreon, I'll be doing a patrons-only stream. So that'll be good. So if you want to be part of that, sign up. If you sign up before Sunday, you can be part of it. It should be good. I'm looking forward. Those are very small, intimate streams where I just answer people's questions. I'm much more forthcoming. I'm much more chill and laid back. I just engage with my audience. So that's a lot of fun. So if you want to be part of that, by all means, sign up on Patreon, link below. Sign up and you can be part of it. So there you go. So yeah, that's really all I had for my opening remarks, just kind of a news roundup. Thoughts on mutual aid? Okay, all right. Mutual aid by leftists. All right, criticism, all right. So we got quite a few super chats to get through, but since we're all here, why don't we do the roll call? Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this on your Facebook, on your Twitter, on your social media. Like, the more people here, the merrier. Let's have a good time. Make this a bigger conversation. This is very random, last minute. We got Char Darling in Nassau County. We've got Fairhope, Alabama, Nicholas Lynch. We got West Palm Beach, Wisconsin, Northern California, Juan from Mexico, Washington State, Chicago, B in Cleveland, Shaw from Maryland, Taipei, Taiwan, Woodlands, Texas, Belize, Joey from Belize, Infrared, very good, very good. Azores Islands, West Palm Beach, Adam M. from Nevada, happy to volunteer with the CPI, very good. Scranton, Pennsylvania, Los Angeles, drinking unnamed apple drink in the Factory of Ideas, says Red Illuminati. Pomona, California. Albany, New York. Silicon Valley, Frank Naha. North Pole, Texas. Cleveland Wasteland. Glendale, California. Marta in Poland. Clydebank, Cleveland. Greece. Hawaii. Istanbul. Kieran from San Diego. Treasure Coast, Florida. West Virginia. Pennsylvania, the heart of all my comrades, USA, Arthur Porter, good friend of the program. Welcome, Pyongyang joking, Kendall in San Diego. Glad to hear that the Infrared's community's here. I'm actually going to talk with Infrared. That's in the works. So we're going to have a stream together at some point. So I'm looking forward to that. He's a new YouTube channel. It seems to have a lot of energy. Been debating Vosh. I like him. I like that. I like what he has to say. Different style than mine, but that's okay, right? People, to each their own. To each their own. I'll happily engage with this Infrared guy. Hi from the Philippines. Awesome sauce. Very, very good. Very, very good. Harold Sullivan, Joey from Belize. Why the gorillas? Can someone explain the gorillas? Why are the gorillas in the chat? I don't know what that means. At first, I thought that was some kind of insult or something, but now I'm confused. What are the gorillas in the chat? Pittsburgh, Naples, Florida, um, Virginia, who else? Can't stop. Okay, very good. Hi from Dallas. Won't stop. Belize. Brett. All right. As this infrared uses the symbol of the gorilla to represent humanity, the humanity we Marxists fight for. Why? Why? I'm confused by that, but I'll have to listen to what he has to say. I'm sure that's a concept he explains on his channel. There you go. All right. It means strength, like alpha energy. Got it. Okay. All righty. Well, there you go. William Z. Foster's birthday is tomorrow. Well, what do you know? There, I guess it is. That's great news. All right. Very, very good. Very, very good. Well, folks, like I said, post this. The more people here, the merrier. I've got a few super chats to get through, so let's just start answering these super chats. So someone asked, what about these MLs becoming Maoists? Now, ML refers to Marxist-Leninists, and what's with all these Marxist-Leninists becoming Maoists? Well, I don't know what exactly you mean. Now, at the time that global communism was a thing during the Cold War. At that point, you had the Soviet Union and China, two very big socialist countries. And you had the two countries not getting along with each other. You had the Sino-Soviet split. And when China and the Soviet Union stopped getting along with each other, 1961, at that point, in a lot of countries around the world, there would be a breakaway from the official Soviet-aligned Communist Party. And that party would often, they had different names. In the United States, there was something called the Progressive Labor Party. There was also something called Hammer and Steel. And there was, in a number of places, there were different groups. And a lot of times those groups referred to themselves as Marxist-Leninists to distinguish themselves, basically to hint that the regular Communist Party was not Marxist-Leninist. They didn't really call themselves Maoists. They were kind of called that. They were called Maoists by their critics. Their critics referred to them as Maoists. But they were more aligned with China, and they called themselves Marxist-Leninists, anti-revisionists. And even still to this day, you have groups like in Britain, you have the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, which is more from the anti-revisionist tradition. You have the Revolutionary Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. Here in the United States, there were a number of groups. Eventually, the Maoist, the China-aligned movement took off. But the thing was, a lot of these groups, they were critical of the Soviet Union. They thought the Soviet Union wasn't as revolutionary as China. It wasn't strongly anti-imperialist. But they still thought the Soviet Union was socialist. They still, were generally against U.S. imperialism. They just, they took leadership and took inspiration from China rather than taking inspiration from the Soviet Union. Things started to change in the early 70s. In the early 70s, China started aligning itself with the United States. First in Angola, and next in a number of places. You had China sympathetic to Pinochet when he came to power. And China was basically arguing that the U.S. imperialists were the main danger, and that because of that, China was going to align with the United States and a number of countries because they considered the Soviets to be the main danger. And that confused a lot of groups. So there were a lot of groups, and then Albania, which had been aligned with China against the Soviet Union. Albania broke with China and started to have their independent lines. So you had a number of communist parties that were aligned with Albania. So you had a whole lot of confusion. And I think a lot of these folks who had been breaking away from the mainstream communist parties in the hopes of forming a more radical version of the communist parties, a lot of those folks got very confused. So, now, nowadays, the folks who call themselves Maoists are usually folks that are ultra-leftists, are usually folks that are the people who go around talking about MLM, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, those are folks that are aligned with extreme ultra-leftist groups like El Sendero Luminoso in Peru and the Naxal groups in India. And that's who they tend to be aligned with. Look, have learned a lot from Mao Zedong. I mean, I have studied the Little Red Book extensively. I quote Mao on here a lot. I end every live stream with a quote, a lengthy, like a paragraph from one of Mao Zedong's statements. I think Mao Zedong is going to go down in history as one of the most important human beings who ever lived. I mean, he's on the level of like a Julius Caesar or an Alexander the Great. All right, May 1968, France. He's definitely a high-ranking, amazing figure, a political genius, a brilliant organizer. In fact, there's a talk I gave a while back. It's one of my when I first started doing these kind of mega monologue talks where I talk for like an hour before an audience. I did a talk called American Socialist Awakening, and I used Mao to try and make a point. So that was pretty neat. So I definitely take great inspiration from Mao, but I wouldn't call myself a Maoist, right? I think that, especially when Mao started pushing the three worlds theory and started pushing the idea that the Soviet Union was the main danger, that was not good. And that, there are things you can learn from Mao, but I would not call myself a Maoist, right? I think that Mao brilliantly applied communist principles and communist strategic organizing to China. And that is definitely inspiring. There's plenty we can learn from, but I'm not a Maoist, right? You can't really be a Maoist in the United States. You can't really be a Kimist or a Jucheist in the United States. You can't really be a Bolivarian in the United States. Look, what Mao did by understanding socialism and Marxism, but applying it to China's unique conditions, is what we have to do. We have to study different socialists, around the world, writing down the super chat, and we have to figure out a unique brand for the United States. What Mao did was largely inspired by, there's one event that had a very big impact on the Chinese Revolution that a lot of people in the United States don't even know about, the Taiping Uprising, right? There was a peasant civil war before Mao was born. Right? Woway. That had a huge impact. And there was a very, very uniquely Chinese strategy that Mao applied. His rural people's war methods. Before the Chinese Revolution, Mao had been a follower of Peter Kropotkin and his anarchism. So you can't really be a Maoist in the United States. You can learn from Mao, you can learn from China, but what Mao did was pretty uniquely Chinese, and it was pretty uniquely 20th century. And what we are going to do is going to be pretty uniquely American, right? We're going to figure out in our country, in our circumstances, in our time, what we can do. And that's all that we can do, and we should learn from it. So I urge people not to blindly follow any of these figures. So that's my opinion on that. Okay, Frank, I hear you. I hear you. I hear you about Alexander there. So there you go. All right. Now, I was asked, what do I take from the Green Book? Well, the Green Book, which was written by Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of Socialist Libya, is a very interesting study of socialism in Libya and how it was applied. And it wrangles with the question of democracy, it wrangles with the question of socialism, and it wrangles with social questions and how you organize society. And it is not a Marxist text, but it is very much a socialist text. I mean, it talks about the problems of capitalism. It talks about the problems of democracy, the need for popular assemblies and councils, the need for involving people in the governing process. It sets out the goal of eventually having the state wither away in Libya. There's definitely a huge Marxian influence on the Green Book by Gaddafi. But it shows that there are different applications of socialism. Just like Mao applied socialist principles to China, Gaddafi applied socialist principles to Libya. And that's a very good thing. And I published my own edition, or the Center for Political Innovation, we published our own edition of the Green Book. And I wrote an introduction talking about the background, about the Libyan war, about Libya's economic successes. You know, no one ever talks about the fact that with socialism, Libya had the highest life expectancy on the African continent, built the world's largest irrigation system, wiped out illiteracy, wiped out unemployment, built, I mean, just huge, huge strides to raise people out of poverty. Libya had great achievements with socialism. No one ever talks about that. So, that's why the Green Book is worth studying. So I think people should check out the Green Book from Muammar Gaddafi. It's an important book, and that's why I published my own edition of it, so the ideas would be out there. And I wrote an introduction to it, explaining what the Libyan war meant and what we can learn from it. There you go. All righty. Someone asked about pre-Marxian progressive historical figures. Well, there's many great historical figures that I think we can learn from. Spartacus, right, the leader of the slave revolt in ancient Rome. He's certainly a figure you can definitely admire and learn a lot from. Yeah, I mean, there are many figures. I mean, when I was a child, I will never forget that, I was 11 or 12 years old, and I was really into Nat Turner. I thought Nat Turner was really awesome, and I read books about Nat Turner. I got a biography of Nat Turner from the library. I liked Nat Turner, and I was just really impressed with Nat Turner, the leader of a slave revolt in Virginia. And when I was a kid, I remember that kind of disturbed my teachers. I remember disturbed some of my teachers and classmates, and that I would admire Nat Turner, who was the leader of a slave revolt. I remember that. That was kind of interesting. All right, bringing socialism up in conversation. So there you go. But yeah, there are many figures that I think are admirable throughout history. Wow, who else? Joan of Arc is a greatly admirable figure. This is by all historical accounts, this is a trans person. A person who did, put on the clothes of the opposite gender in defiance of social norms, take up a sword to battle the foreign occupier to liberate their homeland, believed they were motivated by the voice of God in doing so, and ultimately were betrayed and martyred and burned at the stake for doing so. That's quite an amazing story. You read about Joan of Arc. I mean, there is an amazing historical figure to learn from. All right, Foster ideas to learn from. Very good. Very, very good. So, yeah, I mean, there's many figures you could learn from, I think. But, Julius Caesar is someone I look up to, too, as kind of a Bonapartist figure who could have saved the Roman Empire and turned it into a progressive force. I look with inspiration to Julius Caesar. And Michael Parenti's biography of Julius Caesar is definitely inspiring. In some ways, there are some progressive things about Napoleon. I've read some biographies of Napoleon, and I find Napoleon to be quite an interesting dynamic figure. There are many figures throughout history that one can take inspiration from. Thaddeus Stevens, who was a great abolitionist. John Brown. These are people that you can definitely learn from. So there are many figures throughout history, and that's one of the great things about reading history is you discover people who led amazing lives. I mean, you were asked about figures before Marx in particular. So, I'm not talking about people in the era of Marxism in the modern time. I'm talking about pre-modern figures. There are many figures that are worth looking into. When I was a kid, I was particularly interested in William Wallace, the leader of the Scottish national liberation movement. I think there was that Braveheart movie that came out when I was a kid that everyone saw, the Mel Gibson movie, Freedom. And that movie is so wildly historically inaccurate. But William Wallace, the person William Wallace, who's unlike the figure that Mel Gibson portrays in that movie, was also particularly fascinating. He was kind of an amazing freedom fighter for the Scottish people, and he's worth looking into. But if you also can read about the Jacobite uprising in Scotland, and Bonnie Prince Charlie, and all of that. That's also fascinating to read about. So there are many periods in world history that are worth studying. Right. So, I mean, someone sent a super chat and they asked about, what about the fact that they're saying it's not genocide yeah, I mean, folks, the word genocide is so widely overused, okay? There is a specific meaning to the word genocide. Genocide means you're trying to wipe out a race of people. That's what it means. It means you are intentionally trying to exterminate people on the basis of their race, ethnicity, background, etc. Genocide is a very specific term, okay? And I'm so tired of people using the word very, very, very liberally. I kid you not, there was someone that I encountered, Eduardo, thank you. There's someone I encountered who tried to tell me that when the Amazon rainforest was burning in Brazil, that this was genocide. Well, I'm sorry. The Amazon rainforest, I mean, it's bad for the environment. It was an atrocity, sure. It probably affected the lives of people who lived around there, but trees burning is not genocide. Genocide is the intentional wiping out of a specific race of people. The word genocide has specific meaning. And what is shocking is that, there are concerns about Uyghurs in China that are widely promoted in Western media, but genocide is a very, very, very serious charge. I mean, with genocide, you're talking about the Holocaust. You're talking about the wiping out of the indigenous Native Americans of the United States. I mean, this is a very, very, very serious charge. It is a serious crime against humanity. And according to the synthetic left, according to a lot of the phonies on the internet, which we spend way too much time talking about, we should be focused on the masses, getting to the people who've never met a socialist, not the people that are part of this bread tube, cesspool. But according to them, you have to immediately declare China to be guilty, immediately, of this great, horrendous crime against humanity, genocide. Not say that they've done something wrong, no, they have to be guilty of genocide. And if you don't say that immediately, if you don't immediately say that China is committing absolute genocide, then you are a, quote, genocide denier, and you're the same as Nazis. And this is what was said to me by Jabba the Vosh. He insisted there, and I said, we just don't have all the facts. I pointed out the flaws in some of the sources. Like, one of the main sources for a lot of this stuff about China and the Uyghurs is a guy named Adrian Zenz, who is anything but credible. But if you just point out that, hey, we don't have all the facts here, and that, the word genocide is maybe not the best word to use here, maybe we should look into the details here. If you just say that, they immediately jump, oh, you're denying a genocide. Well, now the U.S. State Department has come forward and said, yeah, we have some serious concerns about the situation there, but we can't call it genocide, right? That genocide is a really, really loaded, serious word. Again, but if China does it, you have to just automatically assume they're guilty. And that is how these people roll. And now the State Department of the United States of America is even saying, yeah, we're not sure that genocide is the right word there. And they're certainly no friends of China. So, all the hateful, awful things that were said about me and said about all kinds of people who just dared to question this hysterical anti-China stuff, it applies to a lot of people. Look, when the U.S. government is trying to escalate tensions against a country, they often make very, very shrill allegations against that country. And often those very shrill allegations turn out to be false. This is just leftism 101. Leftists are the first people to talk about the Gulf of Tonkin, about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. This is just basic stuff that the U.S. media lies to get us into wars. They escalate shrill allegations against foreign countries while downplaying the truth about what's happening, in the allies of the United States. This is long-standing. This is basic. This is Noam Chomsky stuff, right? This isn't even the most radical thing, but it's not acceptable according to Jabba the Vosh. If you say that China is not committing genocide, if you don't believe every allegation against China, you're just like a Nazi. Well, there you go, Jabba. Basically, basically, I mean, the whole world says that while they may have some concerns about it, genocide is probably not the right word. Okay, that there are some concerns, but the term genocide, we're talking about wiping, we're talking about stuff like the Holocaust. Okay, I mean, that is not, that is, that, I mean, that very, very extreme allegation is not being leveled by the U.S. State Department at this time. So, why this demand that we all accuse, I mean, we all accuse China of a very, very heinous crime. This demand, it's not just accusing, it's not just that they're saying it, right? But they're demanding that all of us say it. If we don't repeat, if we don't agree with a very, very extreme allegation, if we will not just immediately agree with it, then we're bad people. I mean, then we have to be canceled. Seriously? I mean, this is dangerous, right? How about I mean, whatever happened to being interested in the truth? Okay. All right. Yeah, someone pointed out there was an article in the New York Times that talked about Rush Limbaugh. That's a good one. Yeah. The only thing is Rush Limbaugh just died. Rush Limbaugh just died, so that people aren't going to get that reference for too much longer. I was shocked. I grew up, or everyone knew about Rush Limbaugh when I was growing up, right? Everybody knew all about Rush Limbaugh, but I met people here in New York who've never heard of Rush Limbaugh. I knew Rush Limbaugh very, very well. I mean, growing up in the little town I grew up in, it was very hard to not know who Rush Limbaugh was. But, I met people who have no idea who Rush Limbaugh is. But so that, now that he's dead, that reference isn't going to last too much longer, I don't think. But, I mean, it's a good one, though. It's funny. Rush Limbaugh. I'm Rush Limbaugh. I still can't get over the fact that when Rush Limbaugh died, the liberals are dumping on him, but all they're dumping on him for is like he supported Trump. It's like this guy's been on the radio for how many years, calling for cuts in government spending, demonizing public employees, bashing unions, saying racist things, saying that if you don't support the war in Iraq and the invasion of Iraq, you're a traitor to the country and need to be deported or something. I mean, but all of that's forgivable. It's just he supported Trump. So, it was just like, it was weird, I mean, Rush Limbaugh was an abomination for decades and decades and decades, but it's like liberals can forgive all of that. They just are mad at him for supporting Trump. I mean, it was just pretty ridiculous. So there was an article in the New York Times. This is another super chat. There was an article in the New York Times that talked about access to contraception in Venezuela has decreased, and forgot to mention sanctions on Venezuela. Of course, right? And this is the game that U.S. media loves to play, right? That all of Venezuela's problems are the fault of the Venezuelan government, and because of that, we have to put more sanctions on the country, and we have to steal more of their bank accounts and freeze more of their assets. And then when they have problems in the country, like they can't, import food, then it's all just socialism's fault. This is the game that they like to play. There's nobody, funny because those New Yorkers didn't know Rush Limbaugh were probably also from the Midwest. Okay, well, there you go. But meanwhile, there's no one that disgusts me more than the Venezuelan exiles. Right? These are people that first of all, they love to play well, I lived under it. Socialism's evil. I've been there. I've lived under. I've seen it. Right? They love to play that card. But on top of that, they're actively trying to starve their own people. They want sanctions to starve their own people. They burn food warehouses to create food shortages. They want the USA to bomb Venezuela. They want the USA to invade Venezuela. They want sanctions on Venezuela. I mean, these people want their own people to die. But they also claim that the reason that they want to do it is because, it's because, socialism's so bad, we want to save our people. But then they actively try to kill their own people. These people want to kill their own people. Dinesh D'Souza, I think his spouse is an ex-Venezuelan, one of these exiles from Venezuela. And what does she go around? Does she try to break the blockade and feed her fellow people? No. Does she try to get the sanctions lifted to try and make sure that her people, don't starve? And no. What she does is she tries to escalate the sanctions and blame then the results on socialism. These people want to kill their own people. They're despicable human beings. Absolutely despicable. There was some comedian who was featured in the New York Times. She's a Venezuelan, and she's this comedian. She's a lesbian. She's a comedian here in New York, and she's anti-Maduro. Gets all this press. Well, it turns out if you look into her details, her father was an executive for the International Monetary Fund. There you go, and so basically before Venezuela broke free, I have reached out to the fellow. We're planning to talk, don't worry. Um, and, yeah, it was pretty crazy. So there you go. And I mean, her father was an international banker, tied to the IMF, and they were trying to, he was one of the people that was looting Venezuela in the 90s when the country was devastated economically. So there you go. If you want to join the CPI live stream, well, all you have to do is come on this channel, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Saturday, February 27th. It'll be right here, and you can watch it. You can be in the chat, and that's great. That's great. So, yeah, there you go. Be sure to tune in. Be sure to tune in to the live stream. All righty. All right. Max Blumenthal censored on Twitter. Yeah, I saw that. He's got a news story about how Reuters and about how BBC and Reuters were cooperating with British intelligence to demonize Russia. And it's true. They're not denying that it's true, but they've put like a disclaimer on the links saying these stories, the information in this story may have been acquired through hacking. And what's your point? I mean, is it true or not? Is it true or not? I mean, and I'm sorry, how many rumors or things that have been acquired that are like negative about different countries around the world that, this is ridiculous. I mean, is it true or is it not true? I mean, who may have been acquired by hacking? What in the world difference does that make? Right? News reporters, they get sources and information from all kinds of different people for all kinds of different reasons, right? So I don't understand. I really don't understand, so why are you flagging a story because it may have been acquired by hacking, right? I mean, you're not disputing the accuracy of it. How about they flag BBC reports and say this report may have been conducted in coordination with British intelligence to try and make Russia look bad? They ever think about that? No. I mean, this is just the bias, right? Basically what they're saying is don't believe this story. Don't click on this story. So there you go. All right. Martin Luther, right? Martin Luther was the leader of the Protestant Reformation in Germany, right? He was a very important religious figure, founder of the Lutheran Church. He nailed his thesis to the walls of the church, a defiant figure who was part of the Protestant Reformation. Sure, that took a lot of bravery to do. He could have been burned at the stake for doing that, right? I mean, that was heresy, right? Defying the church, but it instead launched the Protestant Reformation. Now, unfortunately, Martin Luther was very anti-Semitic, and unfortunately, Martin Luther, in addition to being, definitely a defier of the clerical order and the founder of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther was also very much a defender of feudalism, and he brutally put down some peasant uprisings. So Martin Luther, while he was certainly heroic in the fact that he challenged the church hierarchy and started the ball rolling. I mean, and the Protestant Reformation eventually opened the door to the overthrow of feudalism. He was still very much a product of his circumstances. He was a critic of hypocrisy in religion, but he was very much an anti-Semite. He was very much opposed to peasant uprisings and peasants who fought for their rights. So it's complicated, right? He's a complicated historical figure, but in the fact that that he did challenge the Vatican and stand up against the Vatican, I think that was a progressive thing. And I am Protestant, by the way. That is the wing of Christianity that I associate with. I'm not a Russian Orthodox convert, and I'm not Roman Catholic. My wife is Roman Catholic, but I am Protestant. That is my upbringing. So there you go. Mutual aid and criticism by leftists. That's an important thing to talk about because there's a lot of talk about mutual aid now, and there's a couple layers to this, right? And there's a grain of truth in all of it. I mean, I don't think I think mutual aid is a really important thing. I promote mutual aid. I wish leftists would do more community service and be out there, but the criticism of it is very valid as well. Many people point out that right now, under capitalism, the ruling class is cutting back social spending, which they are. They've reduced the social safety net in a lot of ways. And that leftists should be fighting to demand that the state provide, these social safety nets, not simply provide them ourselves so the state doesn't have to. Well, that's a fair point. I think it's a combination of both. I think as we're, engaging in community service, feeding people, the free breakfast program, it shouldn't be that, oh, there's a free breakfast program, so we don't have to, demand that the government provide food to hungry children. No, it should be we're doing it instead of the state, but it should be about educating people and building a movement so the state will do it. And there are some anarchist currents that will engage in mutual aid and argue that, no, we just need to do it ourselves and the state shouldn't do it, right? And that this, they almost like repeat some libertarianism, right? No one can travel right now at all right now because of the pandemic. I'm not traveling internationally right now. Some people will say, well, we need to do mutual aid. We need to do mutual aid, and the government won't do it, and we should just do mutual aid forever. But, and some people say, well, we shouldn't do mutual aid because we should be demanding the state do it. I don't think it's an either or. I don't think it's an either or. I think that it's a matter of engaging in community aid, feeding people, providing services in the community, becoming like a community hub, right? Doing real work in communities, but educating people about ideology and engaging with people in struggle, right? It's not simply about doing nice things in a kind of a charitable way. One phrase I've heard is people say solidarity is not charity. Solidarity is not charity. And what that means is that, by aiding other people, you are aiding yourself. It's not that you're just being charitable. No, solidarity is not charity in the sense that it does benefit you to engage in solidarity, to build, organizations that fight for the rights of other people. You will eventually liberate yourself. And the Marxist understanding rejects kind of the vague moralistic charity. You do it because it's the right thing. It's like, no, we're doing acts of solidarity. We're joining in struggle with other people, or we're helping other people and being involved in service because the ultimate goal is to overthrow capitalism. So it is for my benefit. It's not charity. I am acting in my own self-interest by engaging in acts of solidarity. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. But no, I would like to see mutual aid projects by Marxists and communists. I would like to see communist food giveaways to low-income families. I'd like to see communist food giveaways and clothing drives and efforts in communities. I would love to see that. I think that would be a great thing that people could do. But while they do it, it would be important to educate people with ideology, right? It shouldn't just be, it should be about building a Marxian organization and building aid in the community. All right. May of 1968 in France. Well, May of 1968 in France, you had a revolutionary crisis. That was May of 1968, and, the Vietnam War was going on. The United States was in Vietnam, and there was a general strike, and there were a lot of factory occupations, and Trotskyites and Maoists, were out in the streets, and there were a lot of militant actions, and students were out in the streets as well. It was pretty intense. And the Communist Party eventually, played a role in de-escalating things. And many people blame the French Communist Party for that. The standard narrative you get is the French Communist Party were a bunch of revisionists, and that they sold out the revolution. Many people pointed out that the French Communist Party was not capable of taking power, right? And that, if the French Communist Party had taken power in 1968, that would have led to a civil war, right? For a major country in Europe to be, having a Communist Party in power would have led to probably a civil war. And the French Communist Party was not prepared to fight a civil war. And they were just not in a position where they were able to actually seize control of the government. And that if the crisis had escalated, it would have become a situation where the French Communist Party would have had to seize control of the government or be exterminated, or you'd have so they de-escalated for strategic reasons. And, many people argue that that was a betrayal. People will claim the French Communist Party was holding back the workers. But you have to remember that a lot of these student groups were a little bit ultra-left. A lot of the Trotskyites, a lot of the Maoists were very, very into, they talk about propaganda of the deed, and they were into violence for violence sake. And so it's complicated. The French Communist Party may have been too reformist in the May of 1968 events, but a lot of the Trotskyites, Maoists, and anarchists were a little bit ultra-left as well. It's been proven there was some CIA manipulation of some of the ultra-left groups in France in May of 68. The CIA was kind of hoping that the negotiations that were happening in Paris between the Vietnamese and the United States could be, ceased, and that there was an attempt by the CIA to manipulate at least some of the ultra-left elements in France in May of 1968. It's interesting. There's a filmmaker that I really like, Jean-Luc Godard. Jean-Luc Godard. And he made a movie, it's reacting to the May of 1968 events. It's called Tout va bien, and it stars Jane Fonda. And it's about a group of French workers in a sausage factory who seize their factory. And they seize their factory and they take hostages, basically. And it's a very artistic film, wrangling with the question of what is the role of intellectuals in the revolution. And I would recommend people watch it. Now, ultimately, the film targets the French Communist Party as revisionist, and it does a lot of little sketches and skits kind of to accuse the French Communist Party of being revisionist and not being revolutionary like the Maoists. I'm not sure that's the correct position. I think that it's complicated, and right in that 1960s left adventurism, a lot of the ultra leftist elements back then, that really ultimately led, that were pushing propaganda of the deed. People talk about the Red Brigades in Italy and Baader Meinhof in Germany. Some of those groups were really not good, and then they ended up hurting the revolutionary movement with their ultra-left adventurism. So it's complicated. Yes, Godard, Adam M. says, Godard made a movie about Maoists. That's called La Chinoise, and I've seen that movie as well. La Chinoise is a critique of ultra-leftism, right? It's funny, because his movie La Chinoise about the Maoists, that's like a criticism of the Maoists, right? And then he made Tout va bien, which is a criticism of the French Communist Party. Both are good movies. They're both worth watching. Tout va bien is basically a critique of the cultishness of the revolutionary intelligentsia. And it's kind of a tragedy. It's about a bunch of college students who become Maoists, and how they're kind of full of enthusiasm, and then one by one they all kind of tragically destroy themselves. It's actually based on a Russian novel, from what I understand. It was an attempt in France in the 60s to do a modern version of a Russian novel about some of the downsides of the revolutionary intelligentsia. Is historical literacy one of the most important things for socialists? Okay, writing it down. I would recommend Jean-Luc Godard's stuff. I would recommend it. It's important. I would check it out, right? But May of '68 was very important for a lot of the, a lot of the artistic and cultural, like the situationist movement, right? And a lot of the philosophy, Jean-Paul Sartre, and a lot of that. You have to, in order to understand a lot of the postmodern stuff, you have to understand May of 1968. That was very big for the new left and for postmodernism, but it didn't work. I mean, let's remember, they ultimately didn't lead to socialism. Now, you want to blame the French communists for that, you want to blame the ultra-lefts for that, you want to blame Marxism itself for that, it's a pivotal event. It's worth looking into, but you have to remember, in France, in the 60s, the United States during that time, the standard of living was much higher for the average worker, right? I mean, now we're facing a global economic crisis. Back then, the post-World War II economic boom, you had a very high standard of living. So the class struggle wasn't the focus. It was more about alienation. It was more about, so it's complicated. All right. Is nationalism in the USA just libertarians? I don't know. I mean, economic nationalism generally is the term used to refer to like tariffs, right? It's like, you're rejecting the World Bank and the IMF and NAFTA, and you want protectionist measures for American jobs. You want tariffs. That's economic nationalism, right? And people put it in with like paleo-conservatives, Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan, who ran for president on the Reform Party ticket. It was like the conservative candidate in the 90s, right? He was a Republican, but he broke with the Republicans and was running as a conservative. It's kind of, right-wing populism, sometimes calls itself nationalism. They talk about the farm crisis in the 80s. There was a lot of that kind of feeling, right? And that some of it is a little bit, populist and on point when they're criticizing huge multinational corporations. But the narrative is like, that we, and libertarianism is a little bit different. A lot of libertarians are for globalism and for free trade, right? I mean, the Libertarian Party itself is a very, very strong opponent of economic nationalism. But, you get, like Alex Jones kind of people, paleoconservatives, which are, sometimes libertarianism and paleoconservatism walk hand in hand, but not always, right? But, economic nationalism, Steve Bannon, that kind of stuff is a little bit more paleoconservative than libertarian. But, a lot of the people that were Ron Paul supporters back in the day, a lot of those folks were, were economic nationalists, and I mean, you talk about the militia movement, and this is the far right in the United States. This is the American far right. The John Birch Society, they were always telling people to get out of the UN. They thought the United Nations somehow violated the sovereignty of the United States. All right, so Huawei Technologies, right? An amazing corporation, a worker cooperative under Chinese law, the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, and the United States government is desperate to crush them. And the chief financial officer is being held against her will in Canada, and that's wrong in my view. And yeah, Huawei Technologies. Huawei is a great success of socialism. It is a state-controlled mega corporation, a huge corporation that functions in line with a state centrally planned economy. I mean, don't ever tell me socialism doesn't work. I mean, in China, they have built the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. They've also built the largest power plant in the world, the Three Gorges Dam. Don't ever tell me socialism doesn't achieve anything, right? That you have a cooperative enterprise that functions as part of a state centrally planned economy in China, and it's the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. Huawei is an amazing achievement of socialism. I'm so sick of people saying socialism never achieved anything. It really, really has. How do you bring up socialism into conversations? Well, look, it fits into a lot of conversations, right? I mean, especially when people are talking about their lives. So one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was an elderly socialist, a woman who recruited me into the political group I was in. She was in her 80s. She kind of mentored me. She was an older socialist. And I remember she told me that one thing you should always do is talk to people about their jobs, right? When you meet somebody, talk to them about their job. Find out what they do for work and ask them about what their typical day at work is like. And that a socialist should constantly be interested in what people do at their jobs, right? And socialists should know this, right? It's not simply that you're showing interest in the other person and making conversation, but as a socialist, you should know what people do at their jobs. You should have an understanding of what different people do at their jobs. And when you meet a new person, you should engage them as a socialist about their job and find out what they do at work, find out what kind of company they work for, that this is your responsibility as a socialist, so you know what they do at the job, and so that you're able to engage with people about economics. Socialism is about economics, folks. It is about economics. It is about class struggle. And socialism is definitely about economics, and it's about economics, right? And when people are talking about, my goodness, my rent is half my income, my rent is 2/3 of my income, you can point out to them that in Cuba, your rent is never allowed to be more than 10% of your income. It's a state law. When people say that, oh, look, the power grid blew up in Texas, you can say to them, in Venezuela and in Nicaragua and in the socialist countries, they're building new power plants as part of their state central plan. You can bring it in. The main thing is to get people to think in economic terms. That is the struggle right now. The ruling class wants us thinking about culture wars. They want us thinking about culture wars, and they want us dehumanizing and blaming other people. Right? They want the old people to blame the young people and say, oh, those young people are disrespectful and they need to get their shit together and work hard. They're all lazy. That's why they get paid less than we do. The old people are like, okay, boomer, I wish old. No. You got to think in economic terms, right? You got to not think in racial terms, right? Not think, not think in not think in gender terms, not thinking, but think in economic terms. Get people to think about economics. If you can do that, you're on the right track already. If you can get people to start thinking about economics, get people to start thinking about economics. It's weird, but they treat the economy like it's just this thing. It's just this abstract thing that just happens, right? Well, sometimes the economy's good, sometimes the economy's bad. No, there are these material forces. These things are really, these are man-made forces that operate for the benefit of some people. And the economy is not magic. The economy is not like a hurricane or an earthquake or a tornado. The economy is made by people to serve people. It's just not to serve us. It's to serve those who own it right now. We want to change that. All right. Since William Z. Foster's birthday is tomorrow, are there any ideas that we can learn from William Z. Foster? Well, the thing is that William Z. Foster, and I made a great video about the life of William Z. Foster. It's called The Legend of William Z. Foster. So I talked with Brenton Langle. I went over William Z. Foster's entire life. So if you want to watch it, and I included video footage of it, and I did a lot to make the video on William Z. Foster's life pretty good. So check it out if you can. But one of the great things about William Z. Foster is that William Z. Foster, he was a communist. He was a revolutionary. But William Z. Foster was also very, very practical. He was constantly calculating about how he could maneuver to get stuff done. Right? He was part of the IWW, the Wobblies. He was an anarcho-syndicalist. He was a wobbly. But he realized that because the Wobblies didn't join unions that weren't controlled by communists, they wouldn't join the existing unions, they lost access to most workers. So he broke from the Wobblies, and he started a practice of boring from within, going into the regular unions, and spreading communism inside of those unions. William Z. Foster, he went to the Soviet Union. William Z. Foster, he was key in organizing the unemployment councils. And he was, he had a particular admiration for Mao in China. And William Z. Foster was a figure who really believed in socialism and really made huge sacrifices for socialism. Had a heart attack and almost died as a result of the stress of the presidential campaign in 1932. Just a resilient person who made a lot of sacrifices, but he wanted to make it count. Right? He didn't want to just, feel good about himself. He was constantly calculating, how can we get stuff done? Right? William Z. Foster is a great man. I would recommend reading Pages from a Worker's Life, which is it's like short little autobiographical pieces he wrote, organized by topic. I would recommend reading The Twilight of World Capitalism, which is a very good book that William Z. Foster wrote, and I read on it. I recommend that. Towards Soviet America, it's a little bit ultra-left, but that's the period the Communist Party was in. It was the heat of the Great Depression, mass unemployment, people starving, so he used some rather harsh authoritarian language, but it's still a good book, Towards Soviet America. There's many good books by William Z. Foster. I like William Z. Foster a lot. I recommend his writing. Anything that William Z. Foster wrote is generally pretty good. There you go. Is historical literacy important for socialists? I would say that yes, historical literacy is important for socialists. And the reason that historical literacy is important for socialists is because of the fact that in order to understand how the world works in our time, you need to understand the way it has worked in the past, right? Kind of what we're doing is we're applying science to the study of history, but also the creation of history. That's really what it is we're doing, and that it's not about just knowing what happened, but it's about knowing why it happened and interpreting history and world events through an economic lens, understanding dialectical and historical materialism, why events happened, what are the class forces involved, what was going on in the economy. That is the Marxian approach, right? Is looking at things through an economic lens. I think that's the important thing there. And I think that's all the Super Chat questions. And it is a little bit late. Is there anything else people want me to talk about before I go? Anything else that is on people's minds? If now would be the time to send your Super Chats. If not, I will probably be finishing up here. I did want to mention that this book on Kamala Harris, people continue buying it and people continue liking it. So I encourage people to check it out. It's certainly it's certainly a unique approach. I keep coming back to it on the lives here. So if you haven't gotten a copy yet, there you go. There you go. So how does the synthetic left say states are further right than the U.S.? The state funds and organizes the far right everywhere on Earth. Are these people clowns? I don't quite get what you're asking there, Captain Waffles. I think that I think what you might be getting at is when people say things like, "Well, the USA is more socialist than China," or silly things like that. That they're thinking purely. Number one, they don't understand that socialism is about state central planning. They think socialism, if it's not ultra democratic, if there's any authoritarianism at all, it can't be socialist because socialist, and it's not socialist if it scares me, right? If it scares my middle class, spoiled little middle class self, right? If it has any of the, because working class life is full of authoritarianism, right? Working class people go into the military. Working class people have police in their schools. Working class people have relatives who are in prison. There is authoritarianism. Working class people in their jobs, it's a much more authoritarian. When you're doing a middle class kind of job, you have more leeway to kind of negotiate with your boss. But when you're doing a low wage job, you do what your boss has said, or you get fired. And that there is, there's a lot of authoritarianism in working class lives, but a lot of these bread tubers are people that grew up in a very middle class life. And, and they don't seem to understand that there is a lot of authoritarianism in the world. And and so they see any authoritarianism and it like triggers them and they want to so there can't be any possible coercion or authoritarianism where it's not socialist. And anything authoritarian or coercive is right wing, according to them, right? So anything that is not happy, fun, and childish. They really do like a childish atmosphere, the synthetic left. I don't know what it is. They want it all to be hugs and rainbows, and they don't understand how the world really is. It's like that NGO culture that I detest so much. If you hear me clap once, you hear me clap twice. It's that I don't know. They are just kind of they live in this very they live in this very very naive world where no one is ever mean to anybody else. And based on that, they're convinced that any socialist society that isn't like kindergarten, that isn't an episode of Barney the Dinosaur, isn't the Teletubbies. Any socialist society where somebody's mean to somebody else is not real socialism because they only want to be happy, fun. It's like they're kind of permanent children. And the synthetic left elements. And they kind of cultivate people to think that way. And so, anything that is authoritarian, anything that is pragmatic, anything that makes people feel like they're part of a group, anything that reeks of conformity and people being proud of their community and loyalty and all the things that are generally things that build civilizations, like loyalty, like justice, like community, like feeling like you belong, like making sacrifices for a cause, that all triggers all of them, right? They just want to do this kindergarten, Barney the Dinosaur, Teletubbies thing. They just can't stand they can't stand the notion of any socialist society that would have any authoritarianism, and they think all authoritarianism is right wing. They don't seem to understand that making a revolution is a very authoritarian thing. Look, when Abraham Lincoln refused to let the slaveholders just walk away with the South, that was very authoritarian. There would still be slavery today if Abraham Lincoln had not been authoritarian and said to those slaveholders, "No, you cannot just walk away with half the country. And on top of that, I'm going to build an army and a coalition government to suppress you slaveholders," right? That was authoritarian. Now, obviously, slavery was very authoritarian, but in order to fight authoritarianism, sometimes you need authoritarianism. Authoritarianism in and of itself is not a value. Classes exist. It's about, again, it's about getting people to think in economic terms. That's what it's about getting people to think in economic terms. Not thinking about, oh, does this person talk nice? Oh, does this person talk scary? Oh, this person... No, it's about getting people to think in economic terms. And, a lot of this bread tube stuff is just very, very middle class, right? Basically what a lot of these bread tubers think, when you really get down to it, is Donald Trump has a bunch of scary authoritarian people in his coalition. Um, that's basically what they're saying. And they don't like it, and they want the world to be happy, happy, fun, and not scary like evil, scary Trump. And they're very, very socially liberal, and they think Republicans are all Nazis because they're scary and mean. And it's like that's not real politics. That is prolonged adolescence. That's prolonged childhood. It's not real politics. But I rant about that. I might rant about that a little bit too much. Whatever. I can't believe I used to be a dumb anarchist who thought states were so scary. Well, I mean, whatever. I was very interested in anarchism when I first got interested in left-wing politics. But I could never find a coherent explanation of what anarchism was. I read every anarchist FAQ. I read the writings of Bakunin. Um, and I even sent my teacher an email and got in big trouble. I sent my teacher an email about Bakunin, and I got in big trouble at one point, my freshman year of high school. It was kind of dumb. Like I read Bakunin, and I remember I really liked God and the State by Bakunin. I was very angry at religion and how it kind of made people stupid. And so Bakunin wrote this very atheist book called God and the State, and I read it, and I felt so fired up. And I tried to read Bakunin and get into Bakunin. And I tried to learn about anarchism, but I just couldn't get a coherent answer about what anarchism was. It was like, it's going to be this stateless socialism. It's going to be free socialism. But I couldn't get a clear answer. I remember I sent away, to Canada. I think I sent away for some like zines from an anarcho-communist, coalition group in Canada. And I just could not find anything that could explain to me what anarchism was, right? It's like, we want no government, but we want no hierarchy, but we want voluntary socialism. And I was constantly, whenever I said I believed in socialism or Marxism, people would be like, how would that ever work? It never worked. And so I was constantly having to explain to people how it would work. So adopting an ideology that I couldn't even figure out how it would work, I couldn't even figure out what they were advocating. I read, I went to, there was a Barnes & Noble, and I bought one of these, like, What is Anarchism books. And based on that book, I still couldn't tell what anarchism was. And it was almost like, and I felt like anarchism is almost more of it's like more of a cultural statement, right? It's more of a vibe. It's more of a mystique. It's more of a fashion trend or something. I do remember, though, what was kind of funny was that I do remember being in high school, and there was a girl at my school who was drawing circle A's on her hand. And I talked to her about it. I said, "Oh, you're an anarchist?" "Oh yeah, I'm an anarchist." "Well, what is your ideology?" It seemed like a lot of people, because their favorite punk band was wearing circle A's, they liked what it was. It was just, I don't know. Anyway, as an up-and-coming socialist, should I study right-wing talking points in depth in order to debate them successfully? Well, that's one strategy. If that's what you think is worth your time. I would engage with people that about socialism and see what they say. Now, if they're heavily influenced by right-wing talking points, that might be worth learning. But if maybe they're influenced by left-wing talking points, right? I would talk to other people and listen to what they have to say, and based on that, develop a response to what they have to say. There needs to be a two-way conversation that goes on, right? You need to hear what the people have to say, and you need to craft your message based on that, right? It's about hearing what people say, responding to what they say. Look, there are people who don't agree, who don't like me, and they make videos critiquing me, and they'll say things that are like shocking to me. Like, I'll say in my videos, one of the most common things I'll point out is people say socialism never worked, and I'll go at great length to show how it did work. And I've seen videos of people watching me. No one ever says socialism doesn't work. I think they do. But that is widely believed among the population. Socialism didn't work. But these people live in their little bubble where no one ever says socialism doesn't work. I think they do, But these people live in their little bubble. And that's a lot of the problem the left has, is they do live in kind of a bubble. They do live in kind of a bubble. And so it's like, but yeah, you should learn to respond to things that people say. I mean, if people say socialism doesn't work, learn how it works. People say that socialism does work, but it's an evil authoritarian state. Well, then learn to respond to that, right? It's about making it a two-way conversation. Marxist analysis of Andrew Jackson. Well, Andrew Jackson he was what you could call like a settler populist, right? There was a division in U.S. society at that time, and that he was a right wing settler populist. His policies very much benefited the people that wanted to expand further westward, and he was in some ways, seen as kind of a hostile force to Wall Street and some of the bigger capital in the United States. But he was far right wing, and I mean, he did the Trail of Tears, the removal where he forcibly removed all Native Americans from anywhere east of the Mississippi River. I mean, that was ethnic cleansing basically. But Andrew Jackson, you could call him a settler populist. He kind of rallied the small farmers and against Wall Street, and against some of the more powerful capitalists. And that's who he was. I don't really have a high opinion of Andrew Jackson, honestly. I see Andrew Jackson in a negative light, and from my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Andrew Jackson break apart the National Bank? Didn't he? Implement more libertarian economic policies as a result of his kind of settler populism? I mean, I don't have a very high opinion of Andrew Jackson at all. But there was like a populist demagogy to it, right? He was trying to rally. He very much was seen as the champion of the settler crowd, right? Of people who wanted to expand the United States further westward, were very bigoted against Native Americans. He was aligned with the slaveholders. He was a right winger. He was a right wing figure, but he was, again, there's people don't like to admit this, but there is a such thing as anti-establishment right wing, right? There are divisions in the ruling class. Trump is right wing, no doubt. I don't agree with his program, but if you think that there aren't sections of the ruling class that hate Trump and can't stand Trump and think Trump is dangerous, you're completely delusional. And yes, there are many Marxists who are completely delusional. They think the whole ruling class loves Trump, and it's only because of the working class rising up that there's anti-Trump stuff on TV. That's ridiculous, right? And I mean, you're living in la la land if you think that. Trump is definitely right wing, and I don't endorse his program. In many ways, I'm kind of glad he's out of office. But I certainly didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for Biden either. But I mean, if you think that the whole ruling class is secretly for Trump, and the only reason Biden won is because the workers, it was a concession because of the struggle, then you're smoking something. Okay, there are differences in the ruling class. The ultra rich were for Biden. The Silicon Valley fascists were for Biden. There are differences in the ruling class. Mike Lindell, of My Pillow, he's for Trump. Fracking companies are for Trump. There are differences in the ruling class. There are divisions in the ruling class. And in a period like this, you have what's called Bonapartism, where one section of the ruling class tries to violently assert its will over other sections. It's a capitalist crisis. So, do folks like these streams where I just get on here, I read you a few news stories, we do our roll call, and then I just answer your questions? I like to come on here with like a presentation to make, but lately I've just been, it's February and I'm just kind of dry, so I just come on here and chat, to pass the time because we're still locked down. If you guys like this, I'll keep doing it. I might start doing this more because it's a way to pass the time. But it needs to be done, right? I like to come on here and give like a very fiery speech, but lately it's like that February feeling. I don't know if you guys get that February feeling where it's just kind of like dry. It's just kind of like, ugh. And especially with the pandemic now where there's no one, you can't have big social gatherings or anything. It's even more blah. You just have this blah feeling. So I'm on here. I read you some news stories and, pandemic and blah, and I'm answering your questions about Andrew Jackson and about all kinds of things. And so I'm glad we're doing that. It's fun. We're just doing the best we can. That's all we can do. So I'm glad I had the opportunity to get on here and chill with you all tonight. You all are very, very important to me. We're like a little community here. So be sure to tune in to the Center for Political Innovation webcast on Saturday. And if you want to be part of the patrons only stream, for patrons only, right? Then just sign up below, right? And join up. Sunday is the deadline, but you can be part of it. Sunday is the day I'm doing my next patrons only stream. All be well. All is well. Hopefully I'll be back, if not tomorrow, the next day. Maybe tomorrow. I'm going to try to do more of these just to, more chill. I won't be on here with a big speech every night, but, just chill, engage with all of you. It's fun. I love you all. I really do. I deeply care about all of you. You all are very, very important to me. The fact that we're on here, it's almost 2 in the morning. We're on here talking communism, and it's late at night, and I'm sitting in front of my bookshelf, and my wife is asleep in the bedroom, and I'm just on here chatting with you all about communism, and that's really great. It's really special to be able to have this kind of community, right? It's really, really something special to be able to just do this. To be able to just do this. I really like it. I really like having you all here. I cannot express to you all how grateful I am that I can just get on here and we can just engage. There's like 200 of you, and that's great. And we're just on here and we're just talking. It's late, but we're getting through life. We're going to get to a point where we can really make a difference. The country needs socialism very badly. Capitalism is in crisis. We're doing the best we can. So much revolutionary love to all of you. Stay strong. Let's build this community. Let's expand this community. And on that note, I think we'll just wrap it up. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Have a good night.